Well, good evening, folks. Thanks very much for coming in. Hope everybody's safe and well. Welcome to night 5 of our Witch Week. But just before we start, I received a phone call from Stevie earlier on this evening from Caledonia Paranormal Investigation Team. They're good friends of ours. We've had them on before. They're quite a big team. But one of the team members, Colin, sadly took ill on Valentine's Day, and he's now gravely ill in hospital. So I'd like to ask you just send out your prayers and thoughts to Colin and his family and all his friends, and to the team as well. So tonight's live, we're going to do just a big dedication to Colin himself. As I say, he has been on before, and he's a really decent guy, genuine guy, as is all the team. So if you can spare a wee thought and a prayer for him at this time, it'd be very much appreciated. So, as I say, tonight's night 5 of our Witch Week. And tonight we're going to be covering the Essex Witch Trials and briefly touching on the Welsh Witch Trials. Now, tonight's Essex Witch Trials is actually written by Laura Dawson, is one of our team. Unfortunately, she can't be on panel, so I'm going to be reading out what she gave us. This is her own work, her research and everything. So this is actually Laura's bit, not mine. Or say this is for Laura. So the Essex Witch Trials from 1484 until around 1750. Approximately 200 witches were tortured, burned or hanged in West. 200,000 witches, 20,000 witches, I'll get it right yet, 20,000 witches were burned, tortured and hanged in Western Europe. Most supposed witches were old women who were poor or were unfortunate enough to have crooked or snaggled teeth, sunken cheeks, hairy lips, or who had a cat. On this alone, many unfortunate women were condemned as witches and went through unbearable and appalling torture. Hey, Laura, you might recognise this bit, though. You might recognise this wee bit. We went through unbearable and appalling torture. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. The pilnywinks, thumb screws, and capsae claws for a form of leg irons heated over a brazier. I think I'm pronouncing this right, Laura. If I'm not, then, stick a wee comment in and tell me to get it right, though. So these were used, they usually got a confession from the supposed witches. So, as you can see so far, again, as we've covered all week, the torture methods were quite brutal back then. Now, when someone mentions the word witches, witchcraft, or witchcraft trials, people automatically think of the Pendle witch trials. They think of Berwick, or they think of Salem. They most certainly don't think of Essex down south in England. Yeah, Essex is where 400 years ago witch trials actually did take place, and it's not really mentioned very much, but it did actually, they were down there as well. Hi, Clint, thanks for coming in, buddy. So in the late 16th century, early 17th century, 90 witches were hung in Essex alone. When Matthew Hopkins, who was also known as the Witch Finder General, visited Essex, 19 witches were hung on his accusations alone, and by his word, his hearsay, no evidence or nothing. So basically, all Matthew had to do was point the finger, and because of the position that he held, everybody believed him. So you were doomed, basically, if he didn't like you. So trying to cover or even read up and investigate every witch trial that took place in Essex would take forever. So what Laura's done for us, she's picked 3 that she found most fascinating and intriguing, and she hopes you'll find them fascinating and intriguing as well. But coincidentally, the first witch trials in Essex that she found fascinating happened to be the first major witchcraft trial that took place in 1566. The accused were Agnes Waterhouse, her daughter Joan, and their neighbour and friend Elizabeth Francis. All 3 women came from the village of Hatfield. On the word of a 12-year-old girl, all 3 women were accused of sharing a cat who happened to be called Satan. Satan was their familiar. A familiar is a common companion or a creature that lives with a witch. and helps them carry out their evil deeds, basically. So Elizabeth Francis is said to have made sexual advances towards a man in the village. The man rejected Elizabeth's advances. This caused Elizabeth to become angry. So what she did was she sent Satan the cat to kill this man. Later in time, Salem the cat found Elizabeth a husband and she bore a child. Elizabeth was so happy with what her familiar had done for her and how happy she was that she subsequently gave the familiar to Agnes and Joan Waterhouse. It was while the familiar was with Agnes and Joan Waterhouse that Salem the cat was accused of spoiling bread and cheese. Not only was Satan the cat accused of spoiling bread and cheese, he was also accused of bewitching a man to death and responsible for the drowning of livestock. Elizabeth Francis was not hung immediately, but survived a whole year by being given a jail sentence of hard labour. Elizabeth Francis was, however, eventually hung in 1567 for her crime. Hi Penny, thanks very much for coming in, Doc.
Shelley's in.
Oh, Shelley's in as well.
Simon's in.
Simon's in as well. Evening, folks. So she was eventually hung in 1567 for witchcraft. Agnes Waterhouse, who was also known as Mother Waterhouse, was accused of being a witch as well. Agnes Waterhouse was accused of using witchcraft to cause illness, and William Finn, who died on the 1st of November 1565. Furthermore, Agnes is not only accused of killing William, but also killing of his livestock using witchcraft, as well as causing illness, and this illness contributing to the death of her own husband. Agnes was also accused of giving a drop of blood, to Satan the cat as a reward for his evil deeds. The red spots upon Agnes Waterman's face were looked at as evidence that Salem sucked her blood. So you can see so far that the charges were quite bizarre. You know, she was accused of drowning livestock and causing illness in the livestock. But Agnes Waterhouse was first tortured to confess to being a witch and using witchcraft, and hanged. Agnes Waterhouse was actually the first woman to be executed for witchcraft in England. Joan Waterhouse, who was Agnes Waterhouse's daughter, who along with her mother Agnes and Elizabeth Francis was accused of witchcraft, was not charged with any crime relating to witchcraft and was subsequently freed. So if you were accused of witchcraft, it wasn't just yourself, your family could have been accused, your husband, your daughter, anybody connected to you, any friends, anybody you spoke to. So really, nobody was safe at that time. So during 1664 to 1646, over 300 women were executed for witchcraft, one of these being Anne West. Anne West was no stranger to justice, as she had previously been in prison after being accused of killing a neighbour's pig. For this she served 9 months in prison. Now accused a second time of using witchcraft, Anne was subsequently found herself in prison again alongside her daughter Rebecca. Anne West of Lawford, Essex, was charged with using witchcraft to kill a baby. Anne West's neighbour, who was pregnant, tragically had a stillborn baby. The neighbour accused Anne West of giving her dirty looks while she was pregnant and believed that these dirty looks caused the death of her child, which, again, is quite bizarre. So basically, this woman was accused of looking at this pregnant lady the wrong way, and they say this is what caused the death of her child. And it was enough to have her arrested and charged and put in prison. So this concerns Laura greatly, as if Rebecca had a learning disability, then Rebecca would not understand the implications and consequences of her actions by agreeing to testify against her mother, because her daughter was very young and it's thought she had a learning disability, and Rebecca was persuaded to testify against her mother. By testifying against her mother, Rebecca West ultimately sealed her own mother's fate, and Anne West was tried and found guilty on the 17th of July 1645 of using witchcraft to cause the death of an unborn child. Anne West was hanged in Manningtree 2 weeks later. It's not known where Anne West is buried, however. This does not end here. In 2015, the author Sarah Pascoe discovered the story of Anne West while she was writing her own novel and started an online petition to have Anne West pardoned. Unfortunately, this was not successful, but if it had been, then Anne West would have been the first witch in Britain to have received a pardon. That's quite unusual, that, isn't it? Something, 400 so years later, petitioning to have an accused witch executed. 1863 was one of the last recorded incidents involving witchcraft to take place. This incident involved an 80-year-old man, not a woman this time, but a man. Old Dummy was given this unfortunate nickname by locals. It was in the village of Sybil, Hemmingham, and he was a locally known man, and he was deaf and mute, so he was given the title Old Dummy. Old Dummy had peculiar habits, though, and because of deafness and the fact he was a mute, Old Dummy found it difficult to express himself rather than using gestures. Old Dummy also became excitable easily, and many regarded these gestures or excitement as proof he was possessed or that he was using the power of witchcraft. Old Dummy was accused by Mrs. Smith of causing her illness and putting a spell on her. Old Dummy spent most of his time drinking in his local tavern called the Swan. On this particular day, the day that Old Dummy was accused by one Mrs. Smith, Old Dummy was enjoying his usual tipple in the Swan when a mob stormed in and dragged the old man from the drinking house and dragged him to a nearby stream. The mob proceeded to throw Old Dummy into the stream. The best way to tell if someone was a witch or not was putting him in the water. An innocent person would sink like a stone, but a witch would simply bob on the surface like Old Dummy did. Old Dummy struggled in the water, and it was while in the water that the hostile mob started throwing stones at him. One of the villagers called out that if someone did not take the old man out, he would die in a minute. Old Dummy lay on the grass, exhausted, wet, cold and muddy. He made his way home, where he lay in his wet clothes all night. 4 days after the attack, Old Dummy was seen still in his wet clothes, trembling, and was seen by a doctor who had seen a significant amount of bruising on his body. His wet clothes were cut away, and Old Dummy remained in the care of the doctor, where he passed away a few days later. The story does not end there. Mrs. Smith, the original accuser, along with the man, was found guilty of the murder of Old Dummy and were given 6 months hard labour. As it transpires, Mrs. Smith and the man had used evidence of a 10-year-old girl to accuse Old Dummy of witchcraft. The evidence was not ultimately sealed. This evidence was which ultimately sealed Old Dummy's fate and tragically led to his death. Most trials that took place were held on the tiniest piece of evidence: hearsay, an accusation, the way you looked, age, the fact you had a cat, a mark on your body, devil's mark, or something you did differently. Confessions were often gained through torture. Thankfully, nowadays, none of these would make it to court and definitely not taken serious. So that's been the story of the Essex witch trials. With thanks very much to Laura, who kindly wrote that. Laura is a member of our team, as I says, but she can't be in panel, so she put that together for us. So going by that story and the stories that were covered all week, it's basically the same thing. You were accused of witchcraft and you were tortured. The methods of torture and extracting confessions were all the same, from top of the country to the bottom. And nine times out of 10, if you were accused, then your fate was sealed. You were condemned. So nobody really did stand a chance. And it's important to note as well that, as I said before this week, witches were often seen as old hags, spinsters, lived alone in cottages, out in the usual kind of image. But anybody could be a witch. You know, it didn't matter what your standing in society was. Anybody could be accused of witchcraft. And my theory is that the people in higher society, they were curious, and no doubt they dabbled in witchcraft, but they were just never caught. And it's just the unfortunate people that were not as fortunate in life that were caught. So that's the Essex witch trials again. All due credit to Laura. So a wee hand, Laura, clap, clap. You know, she done well. She's quite clever. She's quite a clever writer.
She is.
So this week we've covered Scotland and England, and we've not looked at Wales. So I had a wee dig about, and I'm going to be honest, I need to read this as well, because my memory's not that great, and you know, if I try to tell you without reading it, then it'll be a load of waffle. You're welcome, Laura. You're welcome, doll. So we'll move over to Wales. There's not really a lot of the witch trials in Wales for some reason. Because compared to other parts of the UK, Wales had relatively few witch trials and fewer executions, even at the peak of the witch trial frenzy throughout Europe. You know, because the witch trials weren't just confined to the UK, they were rampant throughout Europe, everywhere. People had this big fear of witches, and they all basically had the same method of dealing with them, whether it was the UK, Germany, France, wherever you were, Spain. Everybody had the same kind of idea of dealing with witches: arrest them, torture them, hang them, or burn them. That was it. That was the kind of routine. But legal documents from Wales reach back to the late 16th century, which are the oldest surviving pre-trial documents related to witchcraft in Britain. The prosecution of a suspected witch was never easy. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because I've read some of this, and this is where it gets interesting. The prosecution of a suspected witch was never really easy, and even after a warrant was issued, it was difficult to start proceedings. Today's suspected witches from what was then, now I'm going to try and pronounce this, it's a Welsh word, so if anybody's in Wales and they're listening, if I boop this up, then my apologies, folks. It was in Cairnanfonshire. I think I've got that right. So three suspected witches were apprehended in 1622. A neighbouring justice of the peace who was asked to help the accused recorded that he and another justice could not tell how to meddle in the business of that nature. So going by that shows you how different Wales was to the rest of the UK. As it says there, that it was never an easy process to prosecute a witch, whereas in Scotland and England you were arrested, taken to court, tried and executed. In Wales, even though a warrant was issued for your arrest, it was never easy to bring it to trial. And the judges did not know basically how to handle the case of trying a witch, which is quite unusual. So witchcraft beliefs in Wales became well established in the later 16th century. They were influenced by ideas and events in England, but prosecutors remained relatively low as the courts. Excuse me, folks. As the courts were still new, as in how to try a witch. I lost my train of thought there, folks. So, yet again, you see how Wales was compared to the UK. Wales had to learn from England about how to go about prosecuting a witch, because basically they didn't have a clue. Witches weren't also considered to act alone, and some suspects being called chief witches, suggesting a belief in groups or witches with a leader. Now these are all Welsh words, so I'm just one Cardiganshire labourer claimed he was abducted by a group of 3 witches, including a neighbour, one night and was transported from place to place until morning. This common idea that witches made a pact and the devil wasn't overly impressed in Welsh witchcraft, but animal guises did appear. So, again, England, people were accused singly of being a witch. Sometimes there was groups of them, but there was a lot of people who were kind of singular and being accused of being a witch. But in Wales, it was believed that witches acted in groups and packs. Now, one particular accuser, I don't want to call her a witch, because to me it wouldn't be respectful to her memory. Was called Anne Jones. Anne Jones was indicted for felonious witchcraft in Denbighshire in 1635. The book states the details of the case have not survived, but stories revealed throughout another charge of fraud by falsely claiming to cure ailments. The book states, from these examinations, it's clear that Anne Jones was a confident trickster, claiming to have extraordinary ability of being able to cure very sick children through her influence with the fairies. Her modus operandi was to identify a sick child and then convince the parents that she could persuade the fairies to cure the child. The fairies would need to be shown money and that the sick child had to breathe upon it. Anne was arrested, but 3 months later she died in jail, and it was believed that she died in jail from God's visitation. So it probably is she died of natural causes in jail, but people are saying it was God that intervened and took her, basically. So another one was called Murder by Witchcraft, and her name was Gwen Ferch Ellis from Betts, who was not the first unfortunate witch to have the finger pointed at them, but she became the first to pay the ultimate price after black magic became a crime of the state. Accused of murder by witchcraft at the end of the 16th century, the self-confessed healer was condemned by William Hughes, the Bishop of St Asaph. A charm had been found at the home of the upstanding member of the community, Thomas Moyston, and it was written backwards, which is said to have the opposite effect of a good charm. The trial led back to Gwen. The floodgates soon opened, and when 7 others accused her of additional charges, including causing madness and the early death of a sick man, her fate was sealed. She was hanged in Denby in 1594. So there was, individual cases as well. This other one that I found was the witch hired to destroy the Bishop of St David's. The earliest reference in legal record to witchcraft in Wales was between 1502 and 1503. According to the Bishop of St David's, John Morgan, he took action against Thomas Wirrett, who lived in open adultery. I'll let Sarah try and say these words because I'm not going to try it, folks.
With
Tyne West Fair Guelm.
Aye.
I think. The Bishop disciplined Wirrett and imprisoned Tyne West in the castle at Luhaden. Wirrett rescued Tyne West and put away his wife, who died. Sorry, as I say, I'm reading this off a bit of paper. Wirrett rescued Tyne West and put away his wife, who died afterwards from rumoured sorcery. Tyne West was again imprisoned and afterwards banished. She then hired a magical specialist in Bristol to destroy the bishop. The witch, named as Margaret Hackett, was brought to Pembrokeshire to work her magic and made 2 images in a place called the Paradise Chamber. The book writes, the bishop evidently survived and another more cunning witch was hired to make a 3rd image. Tyne West was then forced to flee to Bristol, but was pursued by the bishop, who survived the attempts to destroy him and was later charged with heresy. So it was in the comments as Angela's in, Ghost Witches is in. Fascinating here what different individuals were accused. It is Laura, they were accused of, as we said during the week, people were accused of the most outrageous things, and back then the general public was so naive that they actually believed them. And a lot of these people were just hanged on hearsay. And whether or not they got a confession sometimes didn't matter. They were going to end up on the gallows or at the stake, regardless. So my next one is the maiden bewitched by evil spirits in an apple. Yes, an apple. The case from 1579 claimed a simple maiden, Catherine Firth David of Melford, was abducted and raped. It was claimed that this happened after she was enticed to run away from her father's house through love magic. The book writes, it was graphically alleged that Margaret had been bewitched through the innovation of evil spirits in an apple and by an enchanted and conjured powder. Documents about the case say that Catherine had been persuaded against her better judgment to meet her abductor, Jonathan Griffith. Hi, Mohammed. And so on refusing to go away with him, she had been she'd been given an enchanted apple by Margaret, I'll try and say that name again, Firth David. The book states, you're laughing at me, aren't you?
Not at all. I wouldn't do such a thing.
Welsh people are lovely, but see some of their words, it's impossible to pronounce them. So the book states, no sooner had Catherine taken a few bites from the apple that she became giddy, her head began to hurt, and she felt a pain in her right side and her teeth ached. Margaret then administered a special powder to alleviate the toothache, but Catherine fell into a sweat and became agitated. The court heard it was probable that Catherine had concluded in her abduction that the claim of witchcraft was made by her father to explain her running away to protect her reputation. The book states, as often the case, an accusation of witchcraft was inseparable from troubling social relationships. The book describes how there were numerous techniques at the time to identify thieves and find stolen goods. It states that the use of a sieve, shears, or a key and book were described in English sources from the same time. But this case involved several suspects offering lumps of cheese that had been inscribed with charms. The usual technique was by Jane Bulkley of Carnarvon. I've just watched The Reckoning. It came out last year. It's based on true events with no proof of witch finding. To see how easy it was to be accused. It was easy to be accused, Shelley, and I say there's somebody that says it was a possessed apple, and it was believed, saying that in this day and age, it's just absurd. And sometimes, this young woman was accused by her father. Sometimes it didn't have to be a love rival or a land rival or somebody you fell out with. It could be a member of your own family that accused you if he done it to try and stop his daughter running away. And when he done it, he probably knew what the outcome was going to be to accuse his daughter of witchcraft because he knew there was only one way to go. So, it shows you that nobody was safe. So my last bit in Wales is in January 1654, two musicians were turning to Carmarthenshire after spending the end of Christmas season in Glamorgan.
There's ghost witches saying, I'm pretty sure there was a witch that sold herself as a herbalist and poisoned apples to give to wives so she could eventually marry the husband and steal the family money, then kill him. And Laura is saying, possessed apple. Now we know where the story of Snow White came from.
That's right, I can see it's the apple on the thing, don't you?
And does she not go into a coma and then the wee dwarfs have got to come and rescue her? Or am I hanging with the wrong story?
No, she falls asleep and it's going to be a handsome prince or something that kisses her.
Aye, but the wee dwarfs are in that story, though.
Is it? No, I'm thinking of Sleeping Beauty. It shows you how much I know my fairy tales. Sleeping Beauty fell asleep and it was a prince that had to come and get her. Mm-hmm. Snow White was poisoned by the apple and the dwarfs came along, felt sorry for her and took her down the road.
Aye.
And, she started cleaning their house for them and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they all became friends.
Yes, friends.
Buddies. Mm-hmm. Short buddies, but however.
Anyway, that's off topic.
That's a load of gibberish. I mean, so as I say, in 1654, two musicians were returning after spending Christmas in Glamorgan. After nightfall, one of the musicians, John Thomas, became frightened after seeing lights and perceiving black things in front of him, which he described as a man on his knees and then a dog. The fellow musicians that were with him said that they saw nothing. The pair returned home and John appeared serious and later unruly, complaining that he'd been frightened by the black thing on the march home and was still afraid. The book states that John remained ill for some time and that he later complained he was bewitched. John and David were called to court on suspicion of being witches, but were later acquitted by a jury. So that is basically all I could find on the Welsh witches. Hi Justin, thanks for coming in. Just walked dog now, my legs are knackered. You just chill for the rest of the evening then. Go do another thing, you walk the dog, that's it, job done. So that was basically all I could find in the Wales side of it. So compared to Scotland and England, there isn't really a lot happening in Wales. It's quite quiet. So to me, if I lived in Scotland and England and the literature, I would have buggered off to Wales.
Well, aye.
Because there was really nothing really happening, and courts were kind of... The thing I find unusual is that even though a warrant, as I said earlier, even though a warrant was issued for your arrest, between being arrested and going to court could take some time because nobody actually knew what they were doing. And I think that during that time, the Welsh judges had never handled a witchcraft case before, and so they were trying to read up on it to find out, what do we do? And they took inspiration from what England was doing. But all in all, Wales, not a lot happening.
No.
So I'm sorry we didn't get much on Wales for you folks. I say there wasn't much to... I could make up stuff, but we don't do that here. We don't do that here.
Over to me now.
What you need is what you get. So now I'm going to hand you over to... I don't know why I'm pointing behind me because she's sitting right there. It's Sarah's turn.
Yes. This is it. Statistics of the witch trials in Scotland. You covered some the other night, but I'm going to get into them in more details. So there was 3,837 people accused in Scotland alone. 3,212 of them were named, and the rest of them they didn't know who they were. 305 were sentenced, 205 were executed, 52 were acquitted, 27 were banished, 11 were declared fugitive, 6 were excommunicated, 2 was outlawed, 1 died in prison and 1 was publicly humiliated, and 98 fled. You were through them overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And out of all the people that they knew, 84% were women and 15% were men. So that's quite a big difference in it.
Aye, the percentage between women and men.
7% of them were under 20. 8% were between 20 and 30. 22% were between 30 and 40. 22% were between 40 and 50. 31% were between 50 and 60. 7% were between 60 and 70, and 4% were above 70.
So Laura says, why so low for men? What our opinion is on that, Laura, is because, it might sound sexist, it's no meant that way, but also back then it was a man's world, basically, and women were seen as an easier target to accuse. And that's basically why. One thing I noticed with Sarah's statistics is the age thing. Say over 30. The average lifespan back then was roughly about 35 years old, which in the case of Elizabeth Sutherland's, aka Demdike, probably one of the most famous of the Pendle witches, she was actually 85. And this was one of the reasons she was actually accused, because people thought that because she was so old, she'd made a pact with the devil to, have a longer life. So this is why probably the biggest percentages were people maybe over the age 35, 40, because you weren't expected to live more than basically 35 years. But the percentage was so low because women were, to me, an easier target, and a lot of women were spinsters, etc. And this was frowned upon. Whereas a man who was a bachelor, nobody bothered. As a single guy, nobody seemed to bother. But if you were a spinster, you were considered. You were. If you were a spinster, you could be in the firing line to be accused. But if you were a bachelor, you were good to go. It's the way the society was back then. Old Dummy was 80, so that was unusual. It was unusual. As I say, with Elizabeth, she was 85, and so she had the finger pointed at her. So maybe this was one of the reasons Old Dummy had the finger pointed as well. And because he was deaf and mute, as I say, people mistook his actions for being possessed. And we all know this day and age, if you know somebody who's deaf, you know somebody who's mute, they do try and, what I do is, I'm quite guilty of it actually. I'm quite hands-on when I'm talking and stuff. So you can imagine a mute person, a deaf person would be, the same, if not more. And so this is the other reason, because he was considered possessed, because whatever he was doing with his hands or trying to, tell people, this seemed very unusual. Which to us today, it's an everyday thing. I do it quite a bit with my hands. I'm quite,
Nearly knocks me out a few times with his hands.
Right, exactly, Laura. Let's say I talk with my hand. That's what I do, Laura. You've probably seen it on lives as well. I'm quite, whatever. So, no, this is what Old Dummy did. So have a simple, but because of that, he was, meant to be bewitched and leagued with the devil.
So, next fact. So, out of all of the numbers, out of the 3,837, 78% of them were married and 19% of them were widowed. But that's not the full of the 3,000, obviously. We didn't have all the statistics back then, aware everybody.
Aye, because back then, obviously, bookkeeper, record keeping wasn't as sophisticated as it became in the late 17th, early 18th century. Then records started getting kept, more precisely.
So these are just kind of loose statistics. So, locations of the accused, 32% of them were from the Lothians, 14% were from Strathclyde and the west of Scotland, 12% were from Fife, 9% were for the Borders, 7% were for Grampian and Aberdeen area, 6% were from Tayside, the Highlands and the Islands, 5% were from the Shetlands, and only 2% were from the central belt of Scotland.
Right, we see Strathclyde, and we see 32% for the Lothians, which could account for the North Berry witches, which Sam covered on Tuesday night. And then you've got Strathclyde and the West, 14% and 2% from the central belt, which could also be Strathclyde, which Shelley covered, Strathclyde with Glasgow and Paisley last night. So that's the two high percentages of people accused.
And the next two statistics I found were really quite interesting. See how we were saying the other night that a lot of people, if you were a midwife, you were accused of being a witch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, out of the 3,837, only 9 of them had put down that 9 of them declared even that they were a witch, that they were a midwife by occupation.
See, this has puzzled me, but I didn't want to ask all week. Why a midwife? Ghost witches she's still in the chat. Maybe she can answer this. Why would midwives seem to be witches? Which is I don't understand. There's Laura's hubby Craig is in. Hi, Craig, buddy. She does. She's really, really good at writing her stories and what have you. Her hands are Laura's hands have a life of their own. Almost possessed. That's Laura's husband, by the way, folks. You know.
But yeah, 9 people, not even 9%, 9 people had put down that they were a midwife by occupation, and 10 people had put down that they practised midwifery. So out of that 3,837, only 19 people of them declared the fact that they were a midwife of some sorts.
Did they declare with you? I think you'd be scared to declare. So why do you think, folks, you know, as I say, I don't know. I don't have a clue, I'll be honest. I don't have a foggiest. Why do you think a midwife would be accused of being a witch? You know, because, you know, she brings children into the world and what have you. So I don't say that would be considered as evil. No. So there's a question for you, because I don't have a clue.
So moving on, 64% of the accused. Now this one really got me, right. You see how all week we've all said that like the witches that were accused were kind of low standing in life. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, according to the statistics, 64% of them were middle class. 29% were lower class, and 6% were upper class.
That's 6%, yeah. Because you could fix difficulties, maybe. Does she mean women's difficulties?
Well, we're talking about midwives.
That'll be women's difficulties then.
Yes, I was.
Right. Got you, Shelley. Got you.
I would assume. But
women's stuff.
64%.
Thank you, Shelley.
Of the people that were accused were middle class.
You see, 6% were upper class, so that's what I mean. And probably the highest rate was in Edinburgh, because Edinburgh, obviously, that still is the capital of Scotland, but you had a lot of upper class people living in Edinburgh. And, you know, we've all seen films, movies, whatever, about these upper class people back in, you know, Victorian times, Edwardian times, who were into devil worship and all the rest of it, and all these mad parties kind of thing. And so that's why I reckon there was quite a lot of it went on, but people were less inclined to point the finger because they knew that they wouldn't be believed, because these upper class people didn't fit the criteria. Because there was a certain criteria of being a witch, which to me is quite bizarre, because, you know, these days you get a murderer, there's no criteria for being a murderer. Anybody can be a murderer, it seems anybody could be a witch, but back then there was a certain criteria, a certain bracket that if you were in there, you were a witch.
So there was 4 types of main evidence back then that would have got you.
Hi, Kerry. That's Simon's missus.
That is.
My mum was a midwife for 40 years. So I dare say, Laura, you know, she could have, a good chance she could have been accused back, you know, back in the day, as they say.
So the first type of evidence was obviously the good old confession. Most of which were done under torture. Second was the neighbours' testimonies. So your neighbour would grash in to the court or whatever. Third was other witches' testimonies, and fourth was the devil's mark.
The practice of midwifery required them to be respectful and trustworthy. Those who dabbled in medicine were occasionally accused, but midwives are generally immune from witchcraft prosecution unless they fell foul of a zealous magistrate or there was some special local belief. Historians have been led astray by a tradition that derives from the discredited work of Margaret Murray. A few spectacular cases have been mistaken for general pattern. Midwife witches have been seen where none. All right, Craig. Well, there you go. I was asking. We need to look into that one. What's the woman's name? Margaret Murray. I'm just going to write that down just now. My trusty pad. Thanks for that, Craig. You're laughing at my trusty pad. Everybody knows I keep a pad beside me for just scribbling on. You know. I make no secrets in my pen and pad. Can't be a pen and paper, folks. You know, your computer can go, but I've never seen a pad of paper explode. Have you?
No, but if
No.
paper gets wet, your work gets destroyed.
Well, just keep in a dry place.
True. So,
Anyway, sorry folks.
back then, there was 6 courts involved. So there was. The first one was the local church court, which really, it wasn't a court as such, it was more people would go into the church and bitch, basically, about witchcraft and stuff. And it was then the people in the church's job to interrogate and gather evidence, but they didn't actually have any criminal jurisdiction.
2 seconds. Evening, Steve. Hope you're doing well, buddy. And Shelley's made a good point there as well. Childbirth went wrong, midwives would have been accused. She's bang on with that one, you would, because basically the midwife was in charge of the whole
Shebang.
The whole process, you know, the squeeze and stuff. And so, you know, if a baby was stillborn or whatever, then the finger would have get pointed at the midwife. So that she makes a good point.
So can I continue without...
I just when I saw that comment and Steve
Right, so yeah, so the first one was obviously the local church where people would go and bitch basically about witchcraft and witches. And it was the job of the people in the church to go and interrogate and gather evidence, but they didn't have any criminal jurisdiction, so they couldn't execute the witches. So they had to move on to the next kind of thing.
They were examiners, basically.
Basically, aye. So the second court type was the Privy Council, and that they were central bodies who didn't hold the trials themselves. What they done was obviously the church would gather all the evidence, take it to the Privy Council, who would then issue commissions authorising people to hold the trials. So they were basically just the kind of middleman.
The Privy Council, Shelley's on the rum. Shelley's on the rum again. Thank you for that, Shelley. The Privy Council were a kind of parliament with the king. If you think back to Henry VIII, his Privy Council, he would sit with his Privy Council and hand out the orders. Mm-hmm. And the Privy Council would kind of do them.
But with the witchcraft thing, they didn't actually have any authority. All they could do was issue a commission, which would then say to, basically, if I was on the Privy Council, I would say to you, right, you can hold a trial against such and such. But I wouldn't actually be able to do the trial myself.
Aye, to be qualified.
Aye, basically. So the third one is the Court of... What's that word?
Judiciary.
That word, you can keep saying that for me because it appears quite a few times now. That was the highest criminal court. It still is it not?
The High Court.
Aye. Usually in Edinburgh, and it was this court...
Sorry, Shelley. I wasn't supposed to read that out loud. Everybody can see it, you know, so it doesn't matter if I say that or no, everybody can read the comment. Crazy thingy. Unsuccessful pregnancy became apparent to her daughter. Natural remedies and lack of training caused rural widows of many unsuccessful deliveries during the time. And births were consistently unsuccessful. The accusation of witchcraft began during the same time period. So that more or less is what Shelley was saying as well. If the birth went wrong, the midwife was to blame, and partly the birth went because they didn't have the adequate training that they needed. Mm. Thank you, Craig.
So where was I? Aye. So that court was the highest criminal court, usually in Edinburgh, and tried numerous witches.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Fourth was the circuit courts. That was just travelling versions of the Court of
Judiciary.
That word. So they basically just went to all the wee local areas and...
Aye, it was sitting session.
Aye.
You've seen it in films where they maybe arrest somebody and they'll put them in jail. Say, well, the judge isn't here until, Friday. Mm-hmm. So you're locked up until Friday.
So number 5 was
I'll keep that in mind, Laura. I think that's Laura. I'll keep that in mind from now on. Hi, Freaky. You read that out loud. I heard them all the way from Canada. Thanks for that, Free. I'm not that loud. Well, sometimes I'm.
So number 5 was just your regular local court, basically. But because witchcraft was such a serious crime, it was beyond their jurisdiction. So all these people would go to the local court, and then the local court would say, no, go away, can't deal with it, basically. And the last one, which ties in with the Privy Council, was the local criminal courts. So they were held under the Privy Council's commissions. They were ad hoc courts, and this means that they tried one person for one crime only. So if you were a witch back in the day and you had done 4 or 5 different things, you'd be tried for the most serious one, because the other ones didn't really matter. And most Scottish witches were tried that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only got one wee bit more of statistics, and this will shock you. So 120. Obviously, they don't have the full picture of how everybody was executed. They've only got 137 in the ways that they were made. But 120 were hanged and then burned.
Mm-hmm.
And 17 had been sentenced to be burned alone. But
There's a but.
there is a but. Most of the women and men where if you're told you were getting burned, people automatically think burned in the stake. You see it in the movies and stuff, the people are all tied up and they're screaming, and that didn't actually happen.
So what happened?
They were burned, but most of them were strangled first. Very, very rarely were you actually burned alive. I thought that'd be quite interesting, because burning's come up quite a few times this week.
It has come out. Well, you're right. Very rarely were they burned alive, because they were either strangled, and some of them did also die through strangulation. And a lot of people think that they're burned at the stake. It's actually the fire that kills you, but the same research has shown that the majority of people who were burned at the stake were actually dead before the flames reached them, due to smoke inhalation, and the heat would burn the inside of their windpipe, right down inside. And this is what actually killed them before the flames actually reached them. Bit of useless information, but
I didn't know that. I genuinely thought that they were tied to the wood alive, kicking and screaming, but no, they were actually strangled first.
they were strangled first, and some were tied, but then some were strangled once they were tied. And if you're a rich family friend or something, who would pay the executioner some money to make sure he just, you were dead, you wouldn't be half strangled. What if you was a witch at night but not during the day? I think you'd be a witch 24 hours a day, Freaky, to be honest with you. So they were hung and cremated. Basically, Freaky, yep, that's what used to happen. In Scotland, they would burn them at the stake. In England, they would hang them and then burn them. The whole idea was that, they burn away their sins. The body would be burned, cleansing them, purified by fire, cleansed by fire.
See, Laura's with me. She thought that they were just tied up and burnt alive.
No, the majority of them were actually dead before the flames got to them.
And Paisley one was burned, someone pushed their leg back in and refused to take the bottom stick back after using it.
When Paisley one was burned, someone pushed their leg back in and refused to take their walking stick back after using it.
Okay.
Do you mean, Shelley, that somebody used a walking stick to push one of the legs back into the fire, and then the person wouldn't take the walking stick back?
Possibly.
I think that's what she means.
That would make sense.
We're just waiting her answers.
Nope.
So not all movies are accurate with info. So no, they're not freaky. You know, in a lot of movies you see them tied to the stake and then the fires are lit and you see, you know, bodies burning and everything. I think that's just for movie effects. But if you actually, you know, reading up on it, as I say, smoke inhalation or just the actual breathing in the heat would kill you before the flames got to you. So a lot of the movies are very wrong.
But see, that's what I'm with freaking now, and that's where I got it from. You watch it in like the Tudors, for instance. Just think that you see folk in that getting burnt, and you see them kicking and screaming and shouting and all the rest. But actually, what would have happened was they would have been strangled first to the point where they would have passed out or nearly died, if not died, and then they would have been whoosh.
Now, the way whoosh, you know. But then saying that, when you think about the amount of people who were actually executed by burning at the stake, I dare say there was, you know, a handful maybe the flames did get to them, but the majority, but there would have been, you know, the handful that the flames did actually get them.
Well, that's what I said. Out of the 300 and whatever people, there was only what did I say, 139 or something, is documented how they actually got executed. So there's still another 3,000 odd people missing.
I mean, you see, back then, record keeping wasn't the best, you know.
No, there was a record of it. There had to be because of the trials. But a lot of the records have been destroyed now. So that's why we can't see exactly what happened. But like I said, my statistics were just rough kind of statistics.
No, but it does give you, even if the statistics aren't bang on, it gives you a rough outline of what actually, you know, what actually happened. Movies and books where I get my smarts from, so now I don't know how smart I be. He's nuts, isn't he? Freaky as nuts. Also, a boy in Paul wanted to witness him getting burnt. His parents said to that he just took his shoes. The boy walked barefoot from Paul to Paisley. The memory never left him, and that info came through family generations. To walk from Paul to Paisley would take, I don't know, back maybe an hour or so. Shelley, what do you reckon?
Aye, nowadays, but back then it wouldn't have looked.
Well, it depends whereabouts in Paisley it was then. You know. The person who owned the walking stick refused to take it back. Got you now, Fleur. Got you now.
But back then the houses and stuff wouldn't have been there. Not as many of them, so it would have been more land.
There would have been more land, but it could have been the other side of it. It depends. I think it was Gallow Hill. Most of them were executed, so, you know, walking through Paul to Gallow Hill to take long. It depends which in Paisley it was. However, right? So, anyway, folks, that's it for tonight. That concludes our witch trials, and we just want to say a big thank you to everybody who's come in this week in the chat. We hope you learned a few things, but Sarah and I also want to say a big thank you to our team.
Yep.
Who have been doing their research non-stop, everybody, and, you know, they've done their lives and what have you, and added Laura's thing tonight. Definitely people walk out. They did, in fact, they used to walk for miles and miles. So the whole team has put 100%, 110% effort into this week. And Sarah and I are over the moon and really, really proud of them because they've done an amazing job. And I hope you all agree. So thanks very much to Paranormal History team. That sounds weird. Sounds weird saying that, doesn't it? Paranormal History team. But thanks very much, guys. You have all done a brilliant, fantastic job for the whole week. Everyone is. So we're back tomorrow night with the whole team, and we're going to round off tomorrow night with the whole team. And thanks very much, Simon and Penny. Thank you very much. We're going to have the whole team on tomorrow night, and 2 witches, possibly a third. We're working on that one. Sadly, Natalie, who was maybe joining us, is unwell, so she won't be able to join us tomorrow night. But she will be coming on, you know, as soon as she's back on her feet. So that rounds up the witch trials and what have you. And we'll be back tomorrow night. So, and just as I say at the beginning, For whoever didn't come in, tonight's dedicated to Colin from Caledonia, Paranormal Investigations team, who unfortunately is gravely ill in hospital just now as we speak. I got a phone call earlier on this evening to say that he was very ill in hospital. So thoughts and prayers are sent out to him. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night for the whole team and our witches. And thank you very much to everybody who's joined us, not just tonight, but all week, for your questions, for your comments, for your jokes as well. And we'll see you tomorrow. So take care for now, folks. Bye.
Bye.